Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. Alex Danes, Vincent Ninja 68 or Frowny Face on Twitter and Instagram, is a kinesiology major at Cal State University Fresno, who is disillusioned by the fitness industry. He's been on a low-carb, high-fat diet for 8 years and routinely has used keto for cutting down to lower body fat while lifting weights and fasting intermittently. He's also a self-proclaimed former chef, geek, and forever student. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you. By the way, I just want to let you know with the pronunciation for the word in exercise science is kinesiology, not whatever you just said.
Kinesiology. Thank you.
It's okay.
Kinesiology. That'll be very helpful for the rest of the interview. Great.
That works up all the time.
And I have to ask you, you're a former chef, according to your Twitter bio, but your Twitter pictures of food certainly don't look like it.
I just kind of stopped caring about presentation after a while. All I really cared about was just, well, what makes me feel good and what helps me perform better. So eventually presentation just went out the window. I'm like, fuck it. What tastes good?
No worries. My food looks horrible too. But would love to just start, Alex, with what got you started on a low carb, high fat diet or keto?
Well, to give you a little bit of background on my quote unquote life story, like most people, I started getting interested in fitness and nutrition because I just wanted to look good. This is kind of a geeky admission, but I got into fitness because I wanted to, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with, cosplay. So you want to dress up as a video game character, an anime character and go to conventions and stuff like that. So I wanted to look good. So I started reading about weightlifting, and of course the conventional wisdom was to eat lots of carbohydrate and just take supplements, load up on protein powder. You've heard it all before. And that's what I did for the first 2 years. And I mean, it worked. I did gain weight. I did start building some muscle, but I was also fat and I was hungry all the time. I ballooned up to around 175 pounds. I put on about 20 pounds of weight, which I thought was mostly muscle, but I was eating whole wheat toast and eating cereal and loading up on sandwiches, and I was taking protein powder, and I was just feeling the need to eat every 2 hours. I was just ravenous. And my thought at the time was, well, I lift weights, so that means that's why I'm hungry. It wasn't until I was scrolling around on a forum and I saw this mention of a documentary called Fathead by Tom Naughton. And it was just this post raving about how everything you know about nutrition is wrong and fat's not bad for you. And I was just thinking to myself, that sounds crazy, but I was curious. So I decided to give it a try. I found it and I watched it and I was just blown away. Tom Naughton did a very effective job at explaining that the lipid hypothesis was essentially an unsubstantiated idea at best, and it just and the whole world just kind of ran with it for the past 60 years. So I considered myself pretty well convinced. I gave it a shot. I started reducing my carbohydrates. I immediately cut out bread and cereal, and well, I didn't know about salt back then, the importance of salt, and I got keto flu. I got sick. I just kind of white knuckled it out, and eventually I started noticing the weight just falling off. And I just started getting more and more interested in the research aspect of low carb diets. I didn't want to be the person that just kind of just took everything at its word. I wanted to know more about the data. So I just started reading literature and citations, checking the sources in papers or articles, and I just became really obsessed with it. And that's what brings me to that's where I am now. I'm just constantly researching, looking up new information, and I've reached a point where I can't keep this to myself anymore. I want to share it with the world. So that's what brought me to academia and eventually, hopefully, in a place where I can help people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really really noble of you to take what you've learned and has worked for you and try to apply it to others. I respect that a lot. And
Absolutely.
can you talk about, the focus of your research and how you're applying this in study?
Well, my overall goal is I just want to be healthy. I just want to be able to live my life in a way that makes me feel good and helps me focus and keeps me energized and, most importantly, not hungry. One of the most frustrating things that I had about my experience with the traditional American diet, or quote unquote healthy diet, which I thought I was doing, was just the ravenous hunger all the time. Every 2 hours, my stomach would just be roaring at me to eat something. And I didn't want to deal with that anymore. And I was told over and over again, eat at a calorie deficit, reduce your calories, over and over again. And that just made me hungry. When I tried eating less, it made me more hungry. It made me more tired, and I get depressed and I wouldn't want to do anything. So I started looking more and more into what is it about keto, high-fat diets, and animal protein, as I'm learning more and more, is so satiating. You read my research brief, so you have a pretty good idea of why that's occurring now. But that's mainly the thing that I want to free people of, is that ravenous hunger that is typically associated with dieting. So that's right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who try keto, carnivore, or low carb experience satiety and freedom from hunger for one of the first times in their lives. And it's really sort of hard to describe to people. And it's like you almost forget what that driving ravenous hunger, I think that's a great word to describe it, is that a lot of people experience, most of their lives.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the misconception, or there's a really tragic misconception about dieting, that it has to be this miserable, stoic experience that you just have to tough out. And it's not a surprise that many people, when they hear about dieting, they just go, I don't want to do that. It's too hard. And I just want to shout from the rooftops and go, you don't have to be miserable. It's actually pretty easy once you get used to, eating fat and protein. It's the carbs.
Yeah. Yeah. That it makes so much sense. And I think, there's so many ways to spread this type of information, and academic is definitely an important one of them. I think the research needs to be spread that way, and it can sort of go top down from the academic literature to doctors and health practitioners down to the people. I think that can be really powerful. There are folks like Sean Baker doing it sort of grassroots, but you need to come at it from all sides. And do you find, obviously you're now starting to publish or at least perform your own research and write about it, but in the actual classwork you're doing or from your professors, do you see a lot of pushback against low carb and keto and a lot of conventional wisdom being, calorie counting, eat less, move more?
Oh, all the time. Oh my God. Okay. So in the kinesiology department, the best analogy I can think for them is, imagine a really big, dumb, strong guy with a hammer, and on the hammer it says, exercise more. That seems to be the mentality for the solution for the metabolic syndrome epidemic, is people are not exercising enough, so we need to have them exercise more. People are becoming more overweight since like 50 years ago. It's because they stopped exercising. Children are becoming obese because they're not exercising enough. And all I want to do is just spring my hand up and go, well, what about obese 6-month-olds? Are they not exercising enough?
Yeah.
Quality of calories is more important than the overall calories. And I just kind of stopped trying to fight professors on this. I've gotten into fights with them over and over again. I don't want to hate on them too much. There have been some very fruitful discussions with some of the more open-minded ones that have read my research, which I'm really, really thankful for. But overall, the general consensus in classrooms and academia is we're overeating calories, we need to exercise more, and there's no discussion whatsoever on the quality of calories or how they interact in the body. And I've been keeping my head down because I just don't see the point anymore.
Yeah. At some point, you have to pick your battles.
Exactly.
I understand that. And just shifting back to you for a little bit, how has low carb keto? You talked about how it's improved your life with the hunger, especially. but also in terms of health and body composition. How has it helped there?
Woo! Okay, so getting back to my root statement of why I wanted to get into it in the first place, I wanted to look good. Let's stop and think about this. Let's stop and justify this for a second. If you could look like a superhero or a boxer or an athlete or whatever, and it didn't require constant calorie counting and stressful macro tracking, all this other stuff, would you do it? I'd say so.
Yeah.
And that was my main motivator for why I was so interested in keto, because I'm not going to lie. I'm not much of a numbers guy. I'm not a math guy. The very concept of calorie counting is disgusting to me. So out of sheer stubbornness, I just wanted to see what would happen if I just restricted my carbohydrate, ate lots of meat, and just lifted heavy things and just kept doing it. And I did it for about 10 years. And I'd say the effects on my body composition has been fantastic. I'm pretty much lean all year round. I feel great. My depression is gone. I'm just highly motivated. My brain is constantly telling me to go do stuff, and I want to research more. Information is exciting. I just feel good. If this diet didn't make me feel good, I wouldn't keep doing it. That's why I find the notion that keto is unsustainable to be ridiculous, because I'm having fun.
Yeah, that's great. And you've been doing it for a long time. Were a lot of those effects sort of in the first year or two, or do you find consistent improvements? I've seen your pictures on Instagram and Twitter. You look like you're in great shape, and it sounds like it's working for you mentally as well. But do you find the benefits have been continuous, or it was mostly upfront and you've just sustained that?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that it's kind of it. I mean, obviously gains will decline over time, but when I first started just my fitness journey in general, the first 2 years, of course, I did the conventional approach, which was, eat a lot, take supplements, and eat a lot of carbohydrate. I'm not going to damn the anabolic effects that carbohydrate time has had on my composition, but I would say that my composition has been continually improving over the years, simply because I just keep lifting weights and eating lots of meat. I never worried about whether or not I was making gains in a super effective way. I just did it because it felt good. I would say that my composition, though, has been consistently stable for the past 5-6 years now, maybe even longer. I've lost track, to be totally blunt. I don't worry about it too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a major feat in itself to have a lean, healthy six-pack body composition, muscular, for a sustained period of time without having to do anything excessively restrictive and feeling good the way you are.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I also want to comment on. I find it kind of frustrating from fitness circles that they say that in order to get like a six-pack or to get really lean, you have to do all this complicated stuff like calorie counting and macro tracking. And meanwhile, I'm just fasting and eating lots of meat and picking up heavy stuff, and I look great, and I don't have to track anything. I mean, obviously, there's some slight genetic factor here too, but I don't consider myself to be anything special. I think anybody can reach a physique similar to mine if they just work hard and they don't touch sugar and they're consistent. And that's really all. That's all health is. It's just consistency. Keep doing the same thing every day.
Yeah, and I think even in the low carb community, there are pockets of it, and I'm not. I don't want to badmouth any parts of the low carb community, because I think they all help people in different ways. But there are definitely parts that emphasize the need to count calories and track macros to get results.
Yeah.
And I think that can be a barrier for a lot of people.
Okay, so I'm really, really glad that I discovered keto before I discovered Reddit's R-Keto. I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So I kind of learned about keto off the cuff, just like on an article, like I heard it mentioned like briefly, and I just thought, oh, so low carb is 100 grams of carbohydrate. Keto is as low as 20 grams of carbohydrate. Okay. And I just jumped into it. But scrolling around in our keto, they make the diet sound so much more complicated than it actually is. And I just can't help but think, if I discovered keto via our keto, how unlikely it would be I would continue it, because they're just constantly telling people to track macros, count calories, eat at a caloric deficit of 500 calorie deficit, and track your ketone levels and test your blood sugar. I'm like, whoa, slow down. It doesn't need to be this complicated. I really appreciate Amy Berger's approach to ketogenic diet, which is just keep things simple. You don't need to do any of this stuff unless you're diabetic or epileptic. You need to restrict your protein. Just keep things simple. It doesn't. That's all it needs to be.
Yeah. And what does a day of eating look like for you, Alex?
Okay, so a day of eating is kind of not really so much eating. I actually spend most of my day fasting. I typically don't really break my fast until around 6 o'clock at night. I actually wake up. The way I start my day is I'll brew a little French press of coffee, and I'll add some salt to it, and I'll just drink a little bit of water, and that's pretty much all I have all day. From the morning all the way to the evening. I'll work out in the fast window. And when it's time to eat, I'll have first dinner, which is typically a pound of steak with a mushroom cream sauce. I'll add in some cream cheese and some Monterey Jack cheese and melt it down with a little bit of garlic and have a side of vegetables with it, sauteed in butter and garlic. And then I'll wait an hour or two. I'll get a little bit hungry again, and then I'll have some kind of I like breakfast at night. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy like a little sausage. It's like some sausage mixed with ground up pork and beef. I mix it together, add some spices and more, maybe 5 or 6 eggs and some bacon, and that's all I eat. And I'm done eating for the another 22 hour fast.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And do you find, I personally found, and I think there's a big variance in how people do on this, eating most of your food at night before bed, do you think that disturbs your sleep at all?
Not really. I actually try to stop eating within 2 hours before bedtime. Typically, okay, so I break my fast around 6 o'clock. I'll have a second dinner around like 8 or 9, not 10 o'clock tops. That's really rare. But I usually go to sleep around 12 o'clock or 11, 12 o'clock. So I don't really feel that, I don't feel like that disturbs my sleep at all. I sleep pretty soundly for the most part.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it varies a lot for folks. I personally found fasting works better for me having an early dinner and then having breakfast, or just lunch and then breakfast. But it's different for everyone for sure. And what type of exercise do you do, Alex?
I really enjoy resistance training. I got into the whole fitness game with weightlifting, and that's what I've been sticking with. I don't want to say that resistance training is objectively the best exercise, but it just happens to be what I find fun. So I really enjoy compound lifting. So the bench, squat, deadlift, overhead press. I dabble into a little bit of Olympic lifting. I really enjoy the clean and jerk and power cleans. I do high intensity interval training. So I'll do calisthenics or sprints. I really enjoy the variation Tabata intervals, which is 8 sets of 20 seconds of exercise at 100% effort, and then 10 seconds of rest in between. Very intense. It's basically 4 minutes of hell. And that's the type of exercise I do. I don't really do that much cardio. I think I've practiced aerobic exercise maybe 5 times in my entire life. But otherwise, I don't really do any kind of cardio. I stick to mostly resistance training and high intensity interval training.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm supportive of that, definitely. Lifting weights is my main focus for all the benefits it delivers. And how do you find keto and fasting has worked with your exercise performance or results?
Oh, it absolutely improved it. So I've learned some really interesting things about fasting over the years. It has a significant effect on epinephrine. So that's, speaking plainly, that's adrenaline. So when you combine that epinephrine effect of fasting with a cup of coffee, I just feel like I have electricity in my blood. I'm just so fired up to work out. You combine that with a little bit of salt before a workout, and I feel great. I actually find that eating before a workout makes me feel sluggish and sleepy. So I don't do any kind of pre-meal intake or supplement or anything like that. The closest I get to a supplement for a workout is just coffee and salt.
Yeah, makes sense. And you don't necessarily want to go into that kind of rest and digest phase before a workout.
No, that's the point. So your parasympathetic nervous system goes into effect, and suddenly you just want to lay down and take a nap, and that seems counterproductive to the very aspect of training, which is to simulate, like a survival / hunt activity. So it makes sense in a fasted state.
Exactly. I talked to Chris Kruger about this a lot.
Yes.
On a past show with his beasting, feasting, fasting method.
Talks
about how hunger means hunt, not eat. So I kind of like that mantra. Mm-hmm. And Alex, how you recently on the topic of fitness, you posted kind of this squat challenge for people. Can you describe that a little bit?
Okay, so something that I've noticed a lot is people's hip flexibility is pretty terrible. So your ability to squat and drive your hips down all the way to the floor until your calves touch the back of your hamstrings is a skill that you should have kept since you were an infant. Your ability to squat is something that you should be able to do. And unfortunately, due to the lifestyle that we've kind of habituated over time, we've lost that. So I decided to just post a little picture of myself just squatting ass to grass. And I just want to see how many people can still do that. And if not, well, guess what? You got something you need to work on. The way you can help improve your hip flexibility and drive your hips down more is I like to suggest something called a pole squat. So what you do is you grab onto a pole or some kind of support rig, like a wall or chair or whatever, and you drive your hips down until they reach a point that you're just slightly uncomfortable with it, and you hold it for a little while, maybe 15, 20 seconds. And then you just repeat that a few times every day. And eventually your hip flexibility will improve enough to a point where you can get that natural squat back. I've helped many people do this. It just takes time and persistence. It's something that you were born with the ability to do so. I think that it would be fruitful for people to just get their squats back.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you provided a way for people to get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
I always think it's funny when you're like walking around or shopping, sometimes you'll see a little kid just sitting in like a perfect squat.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, effortlessly for it feels like sometimes hours on end, and you're like, damn, if everybody could do that, we'd be so much healthier.
Yeah, I feel like that is also, this is something I really want to point out as well, especially in fitness circles. Don't be in such a hurry to just slap a barbell across someone's back and say, all right, go do compound lifting. You got to make sure that your ability to squat properly and your range of motion is actually appropriate first. Otherwise, you can really get hurt.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I wouldn't want people to hold off on exercising altogether, but certainly jumping into heavy compound barbell movements like squats and deadlifts without getting that type of flexibility and mobility is dangerous. But if someone's in that situation, maybe they can start with like machines or something, safer and a lower skill movement.
Mm-hmm. That's something I also want to bring up is that don't hate on machines. I mean, I don't use them personally, but the reason they're there are specifically for people that can't safely use barbells just yet. So if you have to start with just machines, start with machines. It's okay. Just do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Just get started. And Alex, you recently experimented with a carnivore diet. Can you talk, and you're already fairly close to it, it sounds like, but can you talk about what inspired you to do that, why you did it, and then maybe how it went for you?
Okay. Well, this is actually not the first time that I've dabbled in carnivore diet. I tried it last year for last World Carnivore Month. I lasted about 3 weeks, and eventually I just kind of quit. Why? Well, I'll go into my experience with it last month. I tried the carnivore diet again because, Travis Statham. That's how you pronounce his last.
Yep, Statham.
He was a big inspiration because he's done it for years. I'm very sympathetic to the carnivore community. I love what they're doing, and I just wanted to see what it would feel like for myself because my diet's already mostly carnivorous. Really, the only plant matter that I get in my diet is a little bit of greens and red cabbage that I have in my stir fry. So I was just thinking to myself, well, I'm already pretty carnivorous. What would happen if I took that away? And I can't say I was really happy with how I was doing on the carnivore diet. I would still try to fast, but that went out the window really quickly because I was just hungry all the time. I remember describing to you that voracious hunger on the carbohydrate diet. Well, that came back. I was just constantly feeling this need to eat in the back of my head. I would break my fast earlier in the day because I just couldn't take it anymore. I would eat a bunch of hamburgers or ground beef or my steak earlier in the day. I would load up on like 10 eggs a day. I was trying to get more fat. Sometimes I deliberately drink whole cream specifically just because I was told to get more fat. And that constant biting hunger was just constant. It never went away. And after 2 weeks, I didn't last as long. After 2 weeks of just dealing with that, I didn't want to do it anymore. I wasn't comfortable with it. I don't like feeling hungry. And when I eat a ketogenic diet, I don't feel hungry. So there's no uphill battle to resist. So eventually I just went back to what made me feel good.
Yeah. And just to be clear for people, how many vegetables would you say you're eating on an average day, just to kind of compare versus a pure carnivore diet?
Well, that was what was most shocking to me. It's not really that much. I had maybe a cup, and that's being extremely generous. Maybe the amount you could say could fit in the palm of my hand. I didn't have that much vegetable. If you had to add a gram value to it, maybe 2 grams of fiber, 3 grams of fiber, maybe. It wasn't much. I think the reason why I had such a bad response to the carnivore diet was I'm not a big fan of plant fiber per se. Like, I'm not going to shout from the rooftops and tell people plant fiber is going to help you. There's not really that much causal evidence substantiating that. But there is some interesting effects that plant fiber has in the intestines. When you're fermenting a little bit of plant fiber, it activates satiety signals, the satiety hormones, peptide YY and glucagon-like peptide. And I think for me, especially, I was very accustomed to that. Even that tiny amount of plant fiber that I had was all I really needed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to look into that.
I can share citations with you later.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to explore that a little bit more, because I actually experienced the same thing when I started a carnivore diet. I was eating, today I eat 3 pounds a day, and I find I need that much to satisfy myself, which is much more food and much more calories than I ever ate on a ketogenic diet. And in the first few months of a carnivore diet, I was eating even more. I was eating 4 to 5 pounds a day. I was ravenous, just like you. But I just stuck with it.
That's
and
impressive.
Just kept eating a lot. And I definitely gained some weight at the beginning.
No, I think that's a good thing. I'm sure that the hunger is there for a reason. It's probably a signal to promote more anabolic effect, likely for atrophied tissues in the body. And that's something that I really have to praise the carnivore diet for, is that they don't emphasize calorie restriction. They actually promote calorie abundance. Eat more. And I love that. I'm totally for that.
Yeah. I like that message a lot too. And I think one of my former guests, Kevin Stock, has this great fat loss post about I'm going to mess up the names, but I think it's Harry's and Sally's. And he talks about these two kind of archetypes of people coming from a place of excess standard American diet, a lot of weight to lose, versus someone coming from, a place of calorie restriction, other forms of restriction and malnourishment, coming to a carnivore diet. And he said that those people are definitely going to gain weight and be super hungry once they get to a carnivore diet where they're told to eat as much as you want. So I think it's an interesting dichotomy. And, I would never stop anyone from eating a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet if that's what's working for them. I think what you're doing is great. And I think experimentation is also vital. So it's great that you've done that.
I'll probably I didn't mean to cut you off. I'll probably delve into the carnivore diet again at some point. It's just that my circumstances in life right now kind of make it impractical for me to be able to eat 3 pounds of meat a day. I just can't afford it. I'm pretty poor, so I had to like place a limit on how much I allow myself to eat a day. I'll likely give it another chance at some point. I'm not ready to just write it off just yet.
Yeah, student budget life. I know
Right.
what that's like. And who do you think a carnivore diet is for, and who it isn't?
It's hard to say. So I listened to your podcast with Dr. Ken Berry, and he made this really interesting insight on the ancestral aspect of appropriate diet for people. And he tends to be a lot more Nordic in origin, so it would make more sense that a highly carnivorous, entirely carnivorous diet would be appropriate for him. So I feel like if you know your heritage, maybe that would be an insight into what a diet would be appropriate for you. But there's no way for me to say, well, eat this kind of diet because you're this. I don't know. The only way to know for sure is self-experimentation and gravitate to what feels good. You see this a lot with ketogenic dieters and carnivore dieters, where they'll delve into experimenting with plant matter or going a whole hog with all meat. Some people do great, and some people don't do so great. So I like to stick with that. We'll just go with what feels good. I don't like fighting an uphill battle against something.
Yeah, I agree. And I think folks trying to optimize and just mentally masturbate for days would do well to try things out for themselves and see how they get on.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex, this has been great. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss, or any other topics you wanted to bring up, or messages you would have to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. I actually had a really interesting experience in the medical field, just a little bit. So I actually interned at a hospital for a few months, and it gave me a chance to really just kind of explore the world and get into the head of the doctor mentality and nurse mentality of how nutrition works. So I interned at the cardiac rehab center at my local hospital, and it helped give me an insight into the problem with the standard American diet and the quote unquote healthy dietary guidelines of the American Heart Association. So I had a chance to interact with patients. I take their blood pressures. We would get like an assessment of their weight and measurements. And they would interact with a dietitian, and she would give them like diet advice on what to do, which was what you would expect from American Heart Association, which is to reduce your salt intake, don't eat too much red meat, or if any at all, cook with canola oil, which I cringed inside. And of course, the basis of the diet was whole grain, whole wheat, and lots of it. That would be the basis of your diet. And all I could really do was just cry inside, because the patients would literally be hesitant to step on the scale because they were afraid of what they were going to see. And all I wanted to do was just tell them that the advice they're being given is terrible. Even worse, like after they would exercise, they were told to take in a fruit juice afterward because they're going to get hypoglycemia. And yeah, right. And all I could think of was, why are doctors so afraid of hypoglycemia? Because that's a very common experience you see in the medical establishment, is that they're very afraid of low blood sugar. And that's where the recommendations for the medications that diabetics are put on are based in, is that fear of hypoglycemia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the current medication recommendations for diabetics. A popular one is SGLT2 inhibitors. Essentially what they do is they increase excretion of glucose out of your pee. But the problem is that if you're constantly dousing your urethra with extra sugar and glucose, that can cause yeast infections and then eventually, potentially, destruction of the urethra. So your genitalia will get destroyed by it. And that seems to be the strategy. That seems to be the strategy right now. Because I went to a diabetic conference at the hospital. I sat through 4 hours of lectures of what pharmaceutical industries are telling doctors. This is what they do. They're recommending that diabetics eat 60 to 100 grams of carbohydrate per meal, and then take SGLT2 inhibitors and then piss out the extra glucose. And I'm just thinking to myself, why cause the dangerous spike in blood sugar in the first place? That's like telling someone to poison themselves and then take an antidote afterward. That's insane. But that's what's told to doctors. I'm just kind of disillusioned by the entire thing. It pisses me off.
Yeah, it's maddening. And that's why the nutritional guidelines, as much as some people will say, oh, no one listens to those, they're actually really important, right?
No, they do listen to them. That's the problem.
Yeah. Especially, I had thank you for sharing that, but I had a somewhat different but similar frustrating experience seeing what they feed people in like nursing home or elderly communities, which is also based on nutritional guidelines. And, school lunches, if you think about kids who can't afford to bring in lunch or they're just coming to school for their meal and they get a juice box and a box of dry cereal or a bag of chips. And that's all based on nutrition guidelines. They're checking the box on healthy whole grains or servings of grains a day.
It's so short-sighted too, because you look at like school lunches in other countries like Japan, and it's just they got fireworks coming off their plates, how good the food looks. And you look at the American school lunches, and it just looks like a pile of garbage.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, we're just sitting here wondering, and my professors are scratching their heads. Why do we have an obesity epidemic? And I just well, it's not the calories, it's the type of calories.
Yeah, well, hopefully your research will help with that, Alex.
Yeah, I hope so too. I can only hope that the method I've been developing for improving body composition will be useful to people. I actually did create kind of an outline of how people that are interested in weight loss can actually start a ketogenic diet. This is actually something I've been wanting to comment on. I see this a lot with keto circles. They're very enthusiastic about wanting to have people try a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, but it's, at least in my opinion, I feel it's too much too soon to go from a standard American diet and then just jump into a ketogenic diet. Your metabolic hardware is not really ready to just take on all this extra fat and totally have no glucose at all anymore. I mean, yeah, you can make it yourself, but if your body's been accustomed to taking in very large amounts of glucose its entire life, of course you're going to feel like crap when you suddenly take all that glucose away. You see this a lot with articles bashing ketogenic diets. Well, I tried the ketogenic diet for a week and I cut out all my carbs and I got sick and then I quit. Therefore, the ketogenic diet's bad.
Yeah.
They did it wrong. Okay, so this is kind of what like I suggest to people typically. I'm a big fan of an acronym that was created by a kinesiologist, Sean Cruxton. He wrote a book called The Dark Side of Fat Loss. He runs a fitness page called Underground Wellness. He's not really active anymore, but I have a lot of respect for this man. He created Just Eat Real Food, which is JERF. I say this a lot, but I always suggest this first before starting any kind of low carb or fasting regimen, because the root issue of diet, I feel, and I think most people would agree, is processed food. So if your diet is highly processed, you're eating a lot of refined wheat, grain, sugar, processed oils. These are the things that you need to get addressed ASAP. Even quote unquote keto processed foods are not really appropriate for anybody either. And I feel that the base of any diet change needs to come from cutting out processed food first. So before you do any kind of low carb regimen, cut out the wheat, the grains, the breads, the pastas, the cereals, these things that have become daily staples in the diet of the standard American need to go first. And I would say do that for like 6 weeks. 6 weeks is the average amount of time that that's needed to like habituate a new habit. Then I would be more comfortable suggesting a low carb diet, maybe towards like 100 grams. But in the meantime, that means you can still have on a JERF diet, tubers or rice or fruit. These things are perfectly fine. I mean, don't go hard on the carbohydrate. I would obviously want people to have a higher emphasis on animal protein first, maybe some vegetables, but that's it. That would be the first thing that you would do. Afterward, then it would be safe to start reducing your carbohydrate intake. So smaller portions of potatoes and rice and fruit, and do that for another few weeks. Eventually, you would start noticing, and this happens a lot, your fat metabolism starts to develop more because you're not constantly spiking your blood sugar up anymore, and your appetite starts to reduce. And then it's safe to start a ketogenic diet. That's the approach that I typically go with people that are interested in low-carb dieting. And if they notice that their appetite's reducing, then I would feel safe enough to introduce a intermittent fasting window. But only if the appetite reduction is showing. I would never suggest that someone try a fasting window with the inclusion of willpower or discipline. I hate that concept. It should be natural. Fasting should not feel uncomfortable. I'm fasting right now. I just got finished working out in a fasted state. I feel great. It shouldn't be about resisting hunger. That's typically the approach that I suggest for people.
Yeah, I think that sliding scale gradual introduction makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I can see how some folks jumping straight from standard American diet with lots of carbs, processed foods, grains could hit a very hard wall if they try to just keto adapt. And that would take both a lot of willpower and be quite painful for their metabolism. But it makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Alex. This has been great conversation. Really appreciate it. Where can folks find out more about you and follow you?
Just hit me up on Twitter at VincentNinja68. I go by the moniker Frowny Face. It's just for funny. It's just a funny thing. I'm always posting citations. I'm always posting advice. I'm always, if you're interested in ketogenic diet, hit me up. I'm always willing to help people. That's what I'm doing this for.
Awesome. I'll link to all that in the show notes. And thanks again for your time today, Alex.
Yeah, no
really
problem.
Appreciate it.
This was great. Thanks, Scott. Take care.
You too. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.